The grim destruction in Gaza has become a hauntingly familiar image. For more than 2 years, war between Israel and the Palestinians has escalated into scenes of devastation that the world struggles to process. This is a decades-old conflict, but today it spirals more dangerously out of control than ever before. How did it reach this point? And what role has Britain's Labour government played since coming to power? The latest round of violence began on October 7th. That day marked the worst massacre in Israel's history and ignited what Palestinians now describe as their deadliest war. In the days that followed, Israel's Defense Minister Yoav Gallant made a chilling announcement. Gallant declared, "We are imposing a complete siege on Gaza. There will be no electricity, no food, no water, no fuel. Everything will be closed. We are fighting against human animals, and we are acting accordingly." Almost immediately, Israel asserted control over access to vital resources. Electricity was cut, borders sealed, and humanitarian supplies throttled. Back in London, Labour leader Keir Starmer faced questions on whether such a siege could be justified. Starmer replied, "A siege is appropriate. Cutting off power, cutting off water. I think that Israel does have that right. It is an ongoing situation. Obviously, everything should be done within international law. But as weeks stretched into months, famine began to unfold across Gaza. The United Nations condemned it as a man-made humanitarian crisis rooted in deliberate political decisions about territory, aid and media access. Even Britain's government acknowledged catastrophic shortages. Israel, under pressure, briefly paused some fighting to allow limited aid through. Yet for many in the UK, these steps were far from enough. Protesters demanded Britain take stronger action, pointing to its historic role as the former mandatory power in Palestine. One critic accused Israel of a policy of mass imprisonment. They warned, Netanyahu's ministers want to lock the whole population of Gaza into effectively a giant prison, a plan that would clearly amount to ethnic cleansing. Others expressed outright solidarity with protesters worldwide. A speaker declared, "And I stand with the millions of people that oppose genocide because I am one of them. I oppose the blood-soaked hands of this government trying to silence us." On the floor of Parliament, voices demanded tougher action from the Prime Minister. One MP asked, "How many more horrors must we witness before the Prime Minister acts with the same scale of sanctions against Israel to stop this genocide?" Another challenged the government directly. Yesterday, the Israeli Defense Minister threatened the ethnic cleansing of Gaza. What action is the Foreign Secretary taking to stop this and to hold the government of Israel accountable for its actions? For Labour, the debate quickly became tied to a broader question: Palestinian statehood. By mid-2025, Foreign Secretary David Lammy outlined a historic shift. Lammy announced, "I can confirm the UK will recognise the state of Palestine by the United Nations General Assembly in September, unless the Israeli government takes substantive steps to end the appalling situation in Gaza." When Labour came to power, its position on Gaza was markedly different from its pre-election stance. The new government called for unrestricted humanitarian aid, restored UK funding for UNRWA, the UN relief agency for Palestinians, and pledged to respect rulings from international courts, reversing conservative-era restrictions. They also promised to review all arms export licenses to Israel. Senior Labour figures had pressed for transparency long before entering government. One said, "It is for the government, obviously, to review the licenses. They do it one by one. They have got legal advice. We've been pressing them to disclose that legal advice. And I still press them to disclose that legal advice. Obviously, if we're privileged to come into power, we'll be able to see that advice or commission our own." But Labour's tone had not always been so forceful. In the early months of war, they called merely for a humanitarian pause. Only after 4 months of relentless conflict did they demand something stronger. The party stated, "Labour is saying unequivocally that we need an immediate humanitarian ceasefire to end the bloodshed and the suffering." This shift was partly the result of pressure from the Scottish National Party. The SNP forced debates on the Commons floor. Their motion read, "Mr. Speaker, I beg to move the SNP motion that's been tabled in my name and those of my right honourable and honourable friends, which calls for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza from all combatants." Labour's hesitation carried heavy political costs. In the general election, prominent MPs lost safe seats to independents campaigning on a pro-Gaza platform. These defeats struck in Labour strongholds such as Leicester, Blackburn and Birmingham. One victorious independent declared on stage, "This is for the people of Gaza." When asked about their role, another independent explained their mission clearly. They said, "When we came into Parliament, I think the rhetoric was still restraint. People were reluctant to call out the atrocities, but now there is a consensus. So we have tried to hold the government's feet to the fire." For some independents, Labour's double standards were glaring. Orb Khan said, "I've got no faith in karma." On the one hand, he can say that Russia is committing international war crimes, but when it comes to Palestine and Israel, he can't come to terms with it, and he says it's a matter for international court. We want to see a Palestinian state. We want the Israeli state to exist. Over its first year in office, the Labour government made unprecedented moves against Israel. In July 2024, it dropped objections to the International Criminal Court pursuing arrest warrants for Benjamin Netanyahu. A month later, Lamy suspended 30 of 350 arms export licenses, citing the risk of violations of international law. He said, "For certain UK arms exports to Israel, there does exist a clear risk that be used to commit or facilitate a serious violation of international humanitarian law." By November, the government confirmed Netanyahu would face arrest if he set foot in Britain. In May 2025, trade talks with Israel were suspended, its ambassador summoned, and sanctions imposed on West Bank settlers. Lamy's words grew sharper still. He declared, "We must call this what it is. It is extremism. It is dangerous. It is repellent. It is monstrous. And I condemn it in the strongest possible terms." By mid-2025, sanctions extended to senior Israeli ministers. Then, in July, Prime Minister Keir Starmer announced the UK would recognise Palestinian statehood at the UN unless Israel committed to a ceasefire. Yet major questions remained unanswered. Why had only 30 export licenses been suspended and not all 350? Why had the government withheld its legal advice on Israel's actions in Gaza? And most importantly, did Britain consider the war a genocide? The official answer was cautious. The government stated a formal determination of whether genocide occurred should be made following a judgment by a competent national or international court. That position has not changed. But Labour backbenchers pressed for stronger language. Melanie Ward, a former aid executive, recalled her time in Gaza. She described hearing Israeli drones constantly over Rafah and argued, Labour must not shy away from reality. Ward said, even if it wasn't a genocide, it is almost certainly crimes against humanity, and that's surely bad enough. Families of British hostages held in Gaza felt Labour's decision to recognise Palestine raised dangerous risks. Lawyer Adam Wagner expressed their concerns. He explained, the families have been particularly troubled by the recent decision to recognise Palestinian state. The families have different views on the politics of it, but they're concerned, particularly those who still have hostages in Gaza, that by getting involved at this stage, Britain might be disincentivising Hamas from signing up to a ceasefire until recognition happens. Meanwhile, international partners lined up alongside Britain. France and Canada pledged support for recognition of Palestine. Even former US President Donald Trump shifted tone. Trump said, some of those kids are that's real starvation stuff, I see it. And you can't fake that. But Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu rejected the accusations outright. He insisted, there is no policy of starvation in Gaza and there is no starvation in Gaza. 1 year into Labour's tenure, Britain has made symbolic moves, from sanctions to promises of Palestinian recognition. But critics warn it is far too little, far too late. As one observer summed up, we say that it's very little and very late. Another added, we need proper action. It's a small step. It's a positive step, but it is a baby step. The crisis continues, and for Gaza's people, political debates in London and elsewhere remain distant. What dominates their lives is hunger, displacement, and the sheer struggle to survive.